Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz, and I welcome you to a Schwartz Report again. Today, I want to talk about a trend that is so horrible. It's hard for me to understand how it could exist, to be honest with you. I want to talk about how did America become a country where the leading cause of death for children is a bullet in their bodies. I mean, what kind of country would that be true in? How is it possible? I want you to look at this gun violence archive. I pulled it up this morning, and I want you to look at the number of gun deaths. 31,859 gun deaths, 14,000 homicides and murders, 17,754 suicides, 519 mass shootings. How did we become this kind of country? And then look at the children. Children 0 to 11, 223 killed since the 1st of January. All these numbers are the 1st of January to today. 512 injured, 0 to 11-year-olds. Number of teens 12 to 17 killed, 1,071, injured 3,003. So I want to focus on this because we have got to do something about this. And I don't think Americans really realize how drastically and radically we have changed. When I was 12 years old, I got a 22 for my birthday from my father. Now that I look back on it, interesting. My father had been an anesthesiologist and chief of a hospital in the China-Burma-India theater in the Second World War. So he knew exactly what guns did, what bullets did to human bodies. But it never occurred to anybody that you were going to shoot someone. And to give you a sense of the difference, that was 1954. So in 1954, remember, as of today, which we're only halfway through the year, a little over halfway through, where we have 31,859 deaths so far. It'll be probably into the 40s or maybe even into the 50s by the end of the year. But in 1954, there were a total of 4,115 deaths resulting from assault by firearms and explosives. That's about 6 deaths per 100,000. And it was a small fraction of the deaths caused by motor vehicle collisions. A small fraction. Today, just children, it's the leading cause of death. Bullet in your body. And it was the same, and it had been the same in 1950, and it would be the same in 1958. So how do we get from that to this? Well, I want you to look at this other one. Look at this example of gun deaths in the U.S. They've increased, just kids, we're talking about children now, 0 to 17. Gun deaths amongst U.S. kids increased 50% between 2019 and 2021. That's just in the last few years. Now, how did that happen? What is allowing that to happen? Why are we sitting still and letting that happen? And let me give you also a sense of what this is costing. I don't know that you knew this. I certainly didn't until I did the research. And again, I make the point, Schwartz Report is about facts. What you get here in this podcast is facts. You don't get political philosophies. You don't get speculations. You don't get the usual, the usual crap that you hear Congress people saying. I deal with facts, objectively verifiable. And again, let me tell you that at the end of the program, I will post a list of references that you can go to where you can check, A, to make sure that I'm telling the truth, and B, where you can learn much more about these matters than I can cover in just my half hour. Because this is a much bigger problem than I think people realize. And I doubt that very many Americans know that gun violence costs more than $700 per American per year. We spend more on it than on obesity and almost as much as we spend on Medicaid. Think about that. Just for gun violence, we spend almost as much as we spend on Medicaid. And it's extremely racial. Young Black Americans experience the highest rates of gun homicide across all demographics. Black Americans are 10 times more likely than white Americans to die from a gun homicide. In 2020, the last year I could find solid statistics, 12,179 Black Americans were killed with guns compared to 7,286 white Americans. And while Black Americans make up 12.5% of the U.S. population, they were the victims of 61% of the gun homicides. Black Americans are 3 times more likely than white Americans to be fatally shot by the police. That's a whole other issue, and I'm going to cover that in another podcast. 60% of gun deaths among Hispanic and Latin people are gun homicides. Young Hispanic Americans aged 15 to 29 represent 4% of the population, yet they are 8% of the gun homicide victims. In 2015, again, last year I can get really solid information. In just 127 cities, and what that tells you is that this is not uniformly spread across the country. This is something that's going on in very specific pockets. So in 2015, half of all gun homicides took place in just 127 cities across the country. Gun homicides are concentrated in a relatively small number of neighborhoods in those cities. So it's in the cities, it's not uniform. It's very specific, which have historically been under-resourced and racially segregated. Because of the poverty that we are creating in the United States and with its racial overtones, because of the police brutality, all of this gun violence is incredibly racial. It's just, you see this day after day after day. And you have to ask yourself, how is this going on? And there's not a huge outcry about this. Well, part of the answer is that since the early 70s, the NRA transformed itself from an organization which taught gun safety techniques and protocols to young people, everybody, but particularly young people. When I was, as I said, when I got my 22, was a Boy Scout, and the Boy Scouts and the NRA, which was then not a political organization, just a training organization, had programs to teach young people how to interact with guns, and nobody got shot. Nobody thought about getting shot. Nobody considered getting shot. You couldn't get anything like an AR-15 rifle in any case. And I think very few people understood that Richard Nixon personally is recorded as saying he couldn't see any reason why people should be having guns as a matter of course. Now think about that. A Republican president saying, why do people have to have guns and carry them around? And compare that with Ron DeSantis, for instance, recently making it possible for people to carry guns without any license, without any training. Just anybody that wants to walk around with a gun can do it. And in Texas, same thing. There's no background check, no permit, no training. In Missouri, not very long ago, the Republican-controlled House overwhelmingly voted down 104 to 39 votes, a bill to ban minors from openly carrying firearms without adult supervision in public. And they had already voted to repeal a concealed carry limitation in 2017. So what have we got here? We got children carrying guns without having any adult supervision at all in Missouri. Now, what legislator thinks like that? I just don't understand it. And now I want you to look at this other chart about firearm deaths, and look at how much the increase in deaths as a result of the situation that we live in. Look at this chart. Look at the difference in just the last few years. It's an ice hockey chart, ice hockey stick chart. Just astonishing that we put up and have these kinds of numbers. So we need to begin to look at this seriously. 120 Americans per day, on average, are getting killed with guns. 200 more are shot and wounded. I looked at that earlier chart, the one from the Gun Violence Archive that I put up, and I had looked for it the day before, and I was astonished at the difference between yesterday and today, just how many more people had been killed or wounded as a result of guns. We have a psychosis, I would suggest to you. We have a gun culture in which 1 in 5 adults say they have personally been threatened with a gun, and a similar share, 19%, say a family member was killed by a gun. A family member was killed by a gun, including death by suicide, which is a whole other part of the problem of the gun issue. Anyway, 19% say a family member was killed by a gun, and nearly as many, 17%, have personally witnessed someone being shot. Now, I was in the Army, at the beginning of the Vietnam War, and I get someone being shot, but I certainly do not expect back in the United States on any given day witnessing someone being shot. Smaller shares have personally shot a gun in self-defense, 4%, or been injured in a shooting, another 4%. In total, about half, 54%, of all U.S. adults say they or a family member have had one of these experiences. Now, where does this come from? This comes from the Kaiser Family Foundation, which very intensively studied guns and culture in depth and reported this information. We also have huge gender issues. The Kaiser study also found that there's a huge gender bias, not only a racial bias, but a gender bias. Women in the U.S., it breaks my heart just to say this. Women in the U.S. are 28 times more likely to be killed with a gun than women in other high-income countries. American women are more likely to be killed by a gun than women in any other highly developed country. Nearly 1 million women alive today have been shot or shot at by an intimate partner because of some feud in their relationship, and their partner pulled out a gun and shot them. Over 4.5 million report they've been threatened by an intimate partner holding a gun. Every month, an average of 70 women in the U.S. are shot and killed by their intimate partner, and even more are shot and wounded. Access to guns makes it 5 times more likely a woman will be killed by an intimate partner. So what are we going to do about this? I would propose to you that the 2024 election at both the state and the national level is where we have to act. We simply have got to vote for people who represent sensible gun safety. NPR reported life expectancy in this country and the availability of guns is part of the reason why U.S. life expectancy lags behind other similar wealthy developed countries. And gun deaths encompass not just interpersonal violence, but also suicide and injuries. Now, who owns guns? That's the other thing I began to look at. Less than a third of American adults, by the Pew Research Center's calculation in 1917, owned a weapon. 3 in 10 American adults told Pew they currently owned a gun. And another 11% said they don't personally own a gun, but they live with somebody who does own a gun. So we have a minority of people in a minority of places who are the source of a death rate which is unequaled in any other developed nation. Now you need to think about this when you go in to vote. All of this gets argued by the Second Amendment. And I'm going to do another podcast because it is so grossly misunderstood what the Second Amendment was about. This is not just a matter of law, it is a matter of culture. When I was younger, when I was a boy, as I showed you when we started out, a lot of people owned guns. Never occurred to me or anyone I knew, teenagers, adults, who thought that, oh, I'll just go get a gun and go kill a bunch of people. Or I don't like their political views, so I'll go kill a bunch of people. Or I don't like their religion, or their race, or their age. I'll go out and kill a bunch of people. This is an issue of consciousness. It is about the consciousness of this culture. We accept this. It has become normalized. Almost every day you hear these stories of deaths by guns, mass deaths, particularly school deaths. We're now talking about putting policemen in the schools. Did you have policemen in your school when you went to school? Or even worse, we're now talking about giving children bulletproof backpacks. What? So when they're running away and someone shoots them in the back, their backpack will protect them? What kind of culture even thinks like that? We have got to change this because we must to do so if we are to stop this incredible gun violence. And it is, as I say, it is a matter of consciousness and culture. We can change this by changing the culture. It's not the guns, it's the people. People who, for whatever reason, have grievances, and we have become a culture of grievance. If you look at almost any day's news, what you will find or what you will hear on television or on radio or that you'll read is about grievances. People who are calling for violence. Matt Gaetz in the Congress and others like him calling out for violence. Criminal Trump. It's just astonishing. He's just, another case has been decided against him. This is a man with so many felony indictments and convictions that if he were a whole group of people, it would be unusual to have that many. I mean, who do you know who has 91 felony indictments outstanding, who's been convicted of rape and scamming, Trump University, all kinds of criminal activity, and who is calling out for violence? What happens is a result of our attitudes and our expectations. We individually, as Americans, must make the decision that A, we're going to change the gun laws, and I will get into that. I'm not against people owning guns. That's not the issue. It is the culture and the consciousness of people in America and their association with guns and violence. So when you go in on 2024 to vote at the state and the federal level, think about that. Are the people you're voting for promoting gun violence? Forget about the political party part. Just ask yourself, is this person whose name I'm looking at on the ballot, does this person support gun violence? Do they send out postcards with pictures of them holding guns like Marjorie Taylor Greene? or Lauren Boebert? Do we want those kinds of people to be in our government? Because the way we vote in 2024 is going to determine the outcome of what happens with gun violence and the death of children. We have to change the country so that it is no longer true that the leading cause of death for a child is a bullet in their bodies. Thank you.